Hello, and welcome to this latest adventure of mine. I guess that's what you can call it. I'm Charlie, and this is Charlie.inkspired. You may recognize me from a few walks in my life slash career. I guess first and foremost is probably my long, I guess you could describe it as, music career in Adama, which is still very much going strong. And I will be continuing to shamelessly plug that. So if you're not okay with me plugging my own music, then maybe this isn't for you. Another place you may recognize me from is the infamous TikTok. I started creating TikToks in the end of 2022 just for fun, I guess you could say, random videos that are trending, or I don't know. I don't even know what TikTok is. It feels like a fever dream at this point. And by now, in the start of 2024, I have over 60,000 followers there, which is mental, considering all I really post about is either my music or like mental health or the odd fashion video. And it's kind of the reason why I decided to set up in this room. This tapestry behind me is in every single one of my TikToks, and it's kind of, I feel like my image is kind of associated with this tapestry now, which is from Doomsday, by the way, for everyone that always asks, and that's not an ad. I just can't be bothered to reply in the comments, to be honest. But some of you may know me for a bit more of a niche reason, which will probably go out to the OGs who actually know me in life. I used to do a true crime podcast called Crime Note, and I absolutely loved this podcast. It was just for me, it was just something that I really enjoy. As a consumer, I really enjoy true crime. Who doesn't nowadays, to be honest? And I used to get loads of comments about how soothing my voice is, which is kind of ironic considering the content that I would often be talking about in those. But that theme of my voice kind of seems to have carried over into my TikToks, with like hundreds of people swarming to the comment being like, oh my gosh, a posh alt girl, as if that's something they've never seen before. And posh, I don't know, I don't personally like identify with the word, but I guess to anyone outside of Surrey, you probably think I sound super posh. But there you go, I'm a Surrey gal through and through. So I guess here's me giving the people what they want. They wanted to hear me speak more, and so why not restart this? I quit my podcast in spring of 2021 because I joined the police force. So it kind of became a conflict of interest that I couldn't carry on doing that with the information that I had access to, and just, being in the force, I guess. But that was a short lived career for me. But it did give me a massive insight into the way society functions, the law functions, and just people's psychology in these moments. And it only grew my interest for true crime and psychology, I guess you could say. And in 2024, I set myself a goal to push my creativity further than just, the odd silly TikTok that sometimes blows up for absolutely no reason. And I thought, what better time to do it than now, than when I have somewhat of a following behind me, which is something I'm never going to feel actually is appropriate for me to say. But there we go, it is what it is. So I decided to kind of restart my podcast, rebrand it, because a lot has changed for me personally since 2021, whenever it was. But also I wanted to push it that bit further, and I wanted to push it into YouTube as well. So whether you're listening or watching right now, whether you're new or you're an OG from back in the Crime Note days, you're so welcome to be here, and I'm so grateful that you are here supporting me on this weird choice of adventure. So make sure you give me a follow. I'd love to go on and make more content on YouTube relating to music, or I guess I don't know what I want to create, but I just want to create and I want to start building this platform. And true crime is something that I really enjoy and I know is super popular in this day and age. So I thought, let's give it a go. Which kind of brings me to my name, and I guess the name of this rebranding. I've built my platform around this handle, Charlie.inkspired. And to me, that kind of encapsulates everything that fascinates me or inspires me, hence inspired. If you don't know who I am and you're just listening to the audio, that's not going to make much sense. I am pretty covered in tattoos. I'm such a creative person, like obviously music, I'm an artist, I love writing, I love basically anything creative. I will give it a go. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily good, just means I'm naturally very creative. So I thought, let's just carry that through. My branding is Charlie.inkspired, and with that comes true crime, apparently. But enough about me. Now that we've established what the hell this is and why the hell you're here, let's get into a case. I've decided to kick it all off with a horrific crime that is truly close to our hearts here in the UK. And the story we're going to go into today is the case of Sarah Everard. Just quickly before we get into this, I want to say a quick disclaimer. I do not mean any harm nor disrespect to the people attached to this story or that are mentioned in this video. Everything that I'm going to share with you today is information that is readily available on the internet, readily available in press reports, everything. And it's information that I researched myself online. This video will contain a really distressing story. So if you're not in the right headspace to listen to that right now, pause here and look after yourself and come back another time and I'll see you then. I'd much rather you look after yourself because today is a heavy one. I don't know why I decided to start with this one, but let's dig in. Take a breath with me for a minute because this is... yeah, we're going to need it. This case, I think we can all remember so vividly here in the UK. After all, it is one of the most publicised crime cases in the history of the UK to date. And this story brings us across so many topics that are kind of related, and they're really touchy subjects to talk about, but they're important that we do talk about them. And I want to go into those topics with a more kind of researched approach. And knowing what I know now, after being in the force, I think this is a really interesting case to touch upon. And while this case is so known, you've probably heard of all of the horrific details. So what you hear probably isn't going to be new in terms of the actual case from me today. But I do want to touch upon the topics that it brings us across, which may seem unrelated, but we're going to give it a go and I'm going to do my best. So be kind because I'm slightly petrified. To start, we need to cast our minds back to 2021. We've been in lockdown for nearly a year at this point in the UK, a time for many that was filled with loneliness, stress, anxiety, and pretty much any negative emotion you can picture. So let's refresh our memories in terms of what the lockdown rules were at this point in time. By March 2021, the government had started rolling out its 4-step roadmap to normal life. Do you remember that? By March 2021, 17 million people in the UK had been vaccinated. And the slogan across every advert, poster, social media site that you could see was staying home, getting tested, isolating when necessary, getting vaccinated, and following the hands, face, space. Those 3 words still haunt me today. And by March, we were starting to get a little bit of freedom back. We were allowed to leave our homes for recreation and exercise with our households or with our support bubble, which was one person outside of our household. That was a strange time. And as much as that felt like a lot of freedom at the time, we were still very much locked down. And it's really important to mention what the rules were at the time before going through this case, so that you keep that in mind because it does come into play a little bit. On the 3rd of March 2021, 33-year-old Sarah Everard went to her friend's house for dinner. Sarah was born in 1987 in Surrey, but she grew up in York. After school, Sarah went to Durham University, which is a pretty prestigious university here in the UK. Like, it's one of those, you say you go there, people are like, oh, you're smart, you know? And after uni, Sarah moved back to London to become a marketing executive, where she worked for a digital marketing agency. Sarah was described by all her friends and family as driven, beautiful, and kind. Her life was just beginning. She had a good job, she had a committed relationship with her partner Josh, and they were planning on moving in together. Sarah left her friend's house just after 9 p.m. after they had dinner in Clapham Junction. And here she started the 2-mile walk back to her home in Brixton. On her way home, she phoned her partner Josh, and they spoke for about 15 minutes, spoke about their evening, and made a plan for the next day to meet. So on the 4th of March, when Sarah didn't show up to meet her boyfriend, he immediately got worried. Texts and calls started flooding her phone, but no answer at all, which was unlike Sarah. So it's safe to say her boyfriend and her family immediately panicked, and on that same day, they phoned the police. The investigation into this case was immediately taken very seriously. And when I say When I talk about the police in this case and I say anything positive about them, the only positive thing in this story about the police is how they handled this case. They worked hard and they worked quickly to solve this case. But we'll touch more upon the bad bits in a bit. Immediately, as soon as Sarah was reported missing, tabloids press went crazy. It was one of those cases that as soon as it goes public, you just know that it's not going to be a positive outcome. Like, I remember seeing it and I remember thinking something about this one in my gut is saying, yeah, she's not alive. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. This image of this kind, beautiful, blonde hair, blue eyed girl flooded our social media, our tabloids, everything. And I think it's safe to say her image is still ingrained into our heads because she just looked so kind, so gentle, so soft. And it was odd because she just seemingly at the time vanished into thin air. And we got to remember this was in lockdown, so the streets weren't that busy. It wasn't like she got lost in a crowded place. She would have got lost in a fairly quiet, empty street, even in London. Surely someone must have seen her, right? And police immediately delved into CCTV footage. With over 1,800 hours of CCTV footage, the police get stuck in immediately, and they were able to retrace Sarah's steps. They saw Sarah walk from Clapham Common, and about 26 minutes after leaving her friend's house, she was spotted on Cavendish Road. At 9:32 p.m, a passing bus caught Sarah on its CCTV speaking to a man outside a white vehicle. This was spotted on Poinders Road. And it's important to point out that Poinders Road is a main A road. The A205, as it's otherwise known, is a huge road that runs from Clapham all the way through to Dulwich. And at 9:38, a bus caught Sarah getting into this white vehicle with her hands handcuffed behind her back. This bus CCTV footage was absolutely vital. It caught the registration of the vehicle that she got into. So this was the last place Sarah was sighted before she went missing. And not only did the bus catch the CCTV of it, there were witnesses on the bus that were able to describe the man to the police. So the police took this vehicle reg and ran it through their system, which brought up the unsurprising result that this was a hire car. I must have imagined that their hearts sank a little bit, expecting to find some John Doe attached to this, like a fake pseudonym, especially when they realised that this car was hired over 80 miles away from the location it was spotted in Dover, which is like the southeast coast of England. So the police contacted the hire company, and to their surprise, this wasn't hired in a pseudonym at all. This vehicle on this date was hired by none other than a serving London Metropolitan Police officer, Wayne Couzens. Yeah, he hired it in his name, which, is it stupidity? Is it audacity? We don't know, but we'll touch on that in just a moment. Luckily, the rental shop actually had CCTV of Couzens hiring this vehicle, and it caught the exact same outfit that the witnesses had described to the police. He was wearing a black cap, which looks like a baseball cap in the CCTV of the hire car, but in other CCTV later on, it kind of looks like he's wearing a beanie, but that seemingly is the only thing that changed about his outfit that day. He's wearing dark trainers, light kind of chino trouser jeans situation going on, like a long sleeve black jumper, and then with a navy blue body warmer jacket over the top. And of course, a dark face mask. Again, the fact that he doesn't even change his clothes, is it stupidity? Or surely not, because this guy is a serving London Metropolitan Police officer at the time, so he would have known about CCTV. He would have known the kind of things that they would have looked for if he was spotted and witnesses were able to describe him. But part of me believes this is more arrogance than stupidity, because it's not uncommon for people within the law to think that they're above the law. So with all this information so far, just 6 days after Sarah's disappearance, the police have their prime suspect, who so happens to be the last person sighted with Sarah at 9:38 p.m. on Poinders Road. And it's not even that they were just sighted, she was sighted getting into his car handcuffed by multiple witnesses and a camera. So it's safe to say the red flags were just waving all over the place already. So who is Wayne Couzens? Wayne at the time was 48 years old and married with 2 children. He was born in 1972 in Dover. Friends of Cousins described him as weird and that he loved violent films and pornography. There's even a report that he shot his friend in the leg when they were teenagers. There isn't that much information on this. I don't know how they got a gun, why they were playing around with a gun, and if it was an accident at all, which you would like to assume so, considering there's no criminal record of this or anything, but with the information that we're about to discover, you might lose hope on that one quite quickly. In 1982, Cousins starts working at his family business, which is a car garage, but by 2002 he moved on to the Army Reserves. And this was the start of his power trip career, as this led him to opportunities that he necessarily wouldn't have had access to otherwise. And it's not long before he moves into Kent's Special Constabulary, where here he was a volunteer officer. And these are quite common because the police force is underfunded. So they do take volunteers to patrol the streets, which sounds mental, but they do receive training on this. And while they do have policing powers, they are slightly limited to that as a paid full-time working officer. And Cousins was known in this role to always follow the rules, that he respected authority and respected the role that he was there to do, which I think kind of shows how he feels about authority or power. Initially, he really respects power, but then maybe he goes on to get a taste of it himself. I think in this particular role, it's the only time in his life red flags aren't raised against him by his colleagues, but by 2011, Cousins joins Kent Armed Forces in the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. Essentially, this team kind of protected nuclear power plants and, I guess, nuclear materials, which my head immediately just goes to The Simpsons, because that's the way my brain works. And in this role, you kind of guessed it by the title, but Cousins receives firearm training. So already, every time he gets a new job, we're seeing a step up in authority, a step up in responsibility and power. And seemingly that's something that comes into play with Cousins in this case. And it was at this role that he got the wonderful nickname of the Rapist. Where he got this nickname from, we don't know. Why he was called this, why people would joke about this as a nickname, we will never know. But we can hazard a guess. In 2015, it was reported to police that a man was driving around naked, and this vehicle was linked to, surprise, surprise, Wayne Cousins. But bear in mind, in 2015, he was working for Kent Police. So did his colleagues at Kent Police Force know about this situation? Is that where the nickname came from? And after 7 years in the Kent Force, in 2018, Cousins moves over to the London Metropolitan Police. The Met in the UK is the largest police force. They cover 32 London boroughs. To put that into perspective, Surrey covers 11 boroughs. So it's quite literally 3 times the size. And Cousins became part of a really niche elite group in this force. He's part of the Parliamentary Diplomatic Unit, Armed Response Team. Okay, so what does this mean? Basically, this team protects diplomats, politicians, and kind of embassies with, you got it, firearms. And you'd think as soon as you start working for the biggest UK police force in the UK, the indecent exposure incidents would stop. But in this case, you would be wrong. Because in November 2020, Cousins was caught stepping out into a wooded area, completely naked, where he starts masturbating at a female cyclist. And it doesn't stop there. On the 14th of February 2021, so this is weeks before Sarah's disappearance, Cousins goes to a McDonald's drive-thru with his trousers undone and his appendage hanging out. But on the 20th of February, just a week later to this prior incident, he goes back to the same drive-thru, but this time he is completely naked. And you can actually view the CCTV footage of him driving through this drive-thru. So we have CCTV footage of this. We have a victim who actually reported this incident to the police. But sadly, like all other incidents that have already taken place with Cousins, this went nowhere. And I think that is a really unspoken, dark part about the police in this case. That's 2 forces. That's Kent and London Met that have physical evidence of one of their officers committing really horrible crimes that will affect those victims for the rest of their lives. But no action was taken. Why? And last year, a Freedom of Information request to UK police forces was revealed that over 500 officers and police staff were reported for sexual assault in the UK in the last 4 years. And 351 of those are still serving. And knowing that is unsurprising, but deeply disappointing. So it's no surprise that this particular officer slipped through the net so many times. And we start to see his incidents with his history become more and more frequent, and they get escalated each time. So, with that in mind, it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. Do I think these were the only instances with cousins? Absolutely not, because I'm not stupid. How many incidents go unreported to the police each year? And especially if you know that the person who did this crime to you or at you is a police officer. Realistically, what the fuck are you going to do? What are you going to do? Nothing. Because even those that did report this, nothing was done. And we're going on a little bit of a tangent here, but this is important to the case. Because of everything that happens, this case feels so preventable. And in this recent Freedom of Information request, it wasn't just sexual assault that these police officers that were reported for. Over 1,600 officers and staff were reported for domestic violence against their partner, and 78% of those were still serving at the time of this inquest in 2023. And this topic is something that's so close to my heart, because when I joined Surrey Police, I learned very swiftly just how big of an issue domestic violence is. I cannot begin to explain to you how many calls daily in Surrey alone get reported, and that's how many are getting reported. Like, there wasn't a shift without a domestic in progress phone call. There wasn't. They didn't exist. I would pick up multiple of these in one shift of women, majority women, screaming down the phone, absolutely petrified for their life because their partner or ex-partner was threatening to kill them or trying to kill them. And yes, men are victims of domestic violence, and I did deal with those as well, absolutely. But percentage-wise, it is majority women who are the victims, and we can't ignore that, because 1 in 4 women will be victims to domestic violence at some point in their life. And that is a horrific thing to go through, no matter what. But can you imagine if the person that's doing that to you, your partner, your ex-partner, is a serving officer or police staff member? Who are you going to turn to when the person doing this to you is meant to be part of that team that you're supposed to report this to, you're supposed to trust, you're supposed to feel safe around? And yes, we're going off topic here because Sarah's case wasn't a domestic violence case because they didn't know each other. She had never been in a relationship with cousins. She was just in the wrong place at the right time, which is why this case became so infamous. Most women who are murdered here in the UK are murdered by their current or ex-partners rather than strangers on the street. So if we combine that with the fact that it was a police officer, spoiler alert, yet again, it's a unique case. So let's go back onto the timeline of where we left off. So with the CCTV footage and the car being linked into Cousin's name, he's immediately a prime suspect. On the day of Sarah's disappearance, Cousins finished a shift in London and he phoned his wife. He said he had to cover another shift, so he won't be home that night and he'll see her the next day. He then drove all the way from London down to Dover, where he parked his car and went to the car hire shop. He then drove the hire car back to London, stopping on the way to fill his car full with petrol. ANPR cameras caught this hire car with Cousins in it driving around Earl's Court over and over again for like over an hour, which to me only proves one thing. He was hunting. He was searching for an opportunity, for a victim. And this behaviour, coupled up with the fact that it's a hire car that he filled to the brim with petrol, is screaming to me that this was premeditated. Not premeditated in the sense that he was specifically waiting for Sarah. Like I said, I think she was just in the wrong place at the right time, and that's not her fault. I don't mean that. What I mean is he was out there hunting for a victim, and the minute he saw Sarah, he decided that was his victim. And also, a good point to point out is that when he meets Sarah, he doesn't hide his face, and he even shows her his police ID, which may also point to the fact that whoever was going to be his victim probably wasn't going to make it out alive because they would have known who he was. And as if all these signs together weren't screaming premeditated enough, in the back of his car was a kill kit. This contained police handcuffs, Velcro, and self-adhesive carpet protector. And the carpet protector is the strangest part to me because you've been so careless with concealing your identity, but you want to protect the DNA evidence in your car. I understand why he bought the car protector, but it's not, the maths isn't mathsing here. Is it because he thought he was so smart that he was going to get away with it, so he didn't bother concealing his face, or he didn't bother concealing the fact that he hired this car? But by covering the DNA evidence, they couldn't possibly link it back to me. Okay, so at this point he's been hunting around Earl's Court, and we're about 9:30 on Poinders Road, where Cousins and Sarah Everard meet. Witnesses saw Cousins show Sarah something, and we later find out that this was his police ID. He advised Sarah that she was in breach of the current COVID restrictions, and that she needed to get in the car with him to go to the police station, where then the second bus, full of witnesses, saw Sarah handcuffed with her hands behind her back get into the vehicle. And it wasn't uncommon at this time for people to be stopped by the police if they were out. People were getting arrested all the time for COVID breaches. I even got stopped by the police myself after coming back from my sister's in 2021. And even if this wasn't an uncommon occurrence at the time, you are shown a physical police ID. What are you going to think? Realistically, you're not going to question it. So Sarah gets into the back of this car. Cousins then drives this car over 80 miles back to Dover. And honestly, I think this is one of the most chilling parts, is that we are never going to know what happened during that car drive, what Sarah was thinking during that journey, because she would have been watching them get further out of London, closer to the coast, passing police station after police station. Surely it mustn't have been longer than 20 minutes before she knew this, I'm not going to the police station here. And at 11:30 p.m, Cousin's car was spotted in Dover. He parked the car up and then switched back to his personal vehicle that he'd parked down a private road earlier that day. CCTV then caught Cousin's personal car driving out to what seemed like the middle of nowhere at around 11:53 p.m. Police were able to use his phone with the connections that it made to the masts and towers around him to kind of trace where he was going this evening. And at 1 a.m, he was placed in a rural area in Dover. And in this particular area, Cousins owned a plot of land that he bought back in 2019. Why did he buy this small plot of land in 2019? Because he hadn't really used it that much before this. Was this also part of his master plan? If it was, that's a long time to be building up to this. So here, 70 to 80 miles away from her home is where Sarah's fate was decided. Sarah was raped and strangled to death with a belt. After this, Cousins leaves Sarah's body on the plot of land and he drives off. By 8:15 a.m, Cousins was spotted in a local Costa, enjoying a morning coffee, where he's just chilling with his morning coffee, and he looks totally relaxed. Not like he's just murdered a woman and left her in a plot of land. He then went to B&Q to buy industrial bin bags, where again he was caught on CCTV in the same clothes. And he starts to drive back to this plot of land where Sarah's body is. And it's here that he finds an abandoned, huge case fridge. So he stops at a petrol station and fills up a jerry can. So once he's back, he takes Sarah's body and places it in this freezer, covers her with petrol and sets her on fire. Once the fire was out and Sarah's body was pretty much unrecognizable, he placed her body parts into these bin bags. He then dumped the bin bags in a pond that was 100 feet away from this plot of land in his name. Her body was so badly damaged that they could only identify her through her dental records. He then removed Sarah's SIM card from her phone and threw it in a local river. I just can't fathom the process Like, there are so many steps to this over quite a fair amount of time, from the point where he hires the vehicle the prior day, drives to London, scouts out for a victim, and then even when he gets Sarah back and then kills her, like, at no point does he have that thing in his head to stop and be like, what am I doing? What am I trying to do here? Which all points to the fact that this isn't a man that's just snapped. This isn't an impulsive decision. This is methodical and thought out. On the 8th of March, 5 days after Sarah's disappearance, Cousins calls into work sick with stress. And on this day, he took his family for a picnic, and he took them to a place that he really wanted to revisit again, which was this plot of land where Sarah was murdered. Seems like an odd place to take your family for a lovely picnic. But then again, I don't think he was here to just enjoy the scene. There's two ways you can look at this exact scenario. Either he was going back there to check up on the scene, to see if anyone was snooting around, see if anyone suspected anything, or he went back for some sort of sick thrill. And in this week after Sarah's disappearance, he's living his life totally normally, apart from the fact he's phoned in sick to work with stress, he's taking his children to school, he's taking his dog to the vets, he's going to appointments, like he's living normally. A day after this, 6 days after Sarah's disappearance, the police pay Cousins a visit at his home address. And the interview that takes place here can be found online. And it is a really interesting watch. You can kind of see from his body language, from the way he's speaking, from the way he's breathing, he is lying through gritted teeth. The interviewing officer asks Cousins, "Do you know Sarah?" And he replies, "No." They go on to ask if Cousins knew anything about her. He says he's seen the news reports, but he's never met her. And by this point, I think Cousins has clocked that they've got him. They've got something to link him here. And he starts to say, well, you must have something. You must have something to make you think that I know her. And with that, I think he very, very quickly realizes that his jig is up and he needs to say something, whether that's the truth or a lie. And I think it's no surprise to say that he comes up with a lie, and an odd one at that. Cousins comes up with a theory of a gang that forced him to abduct Sarah. He says, "I'm in financial shit. An Eastern European gang told me I needed to go pick up girls and bring them to them. They said they were going to take my family and harm them instead. I had no option." He then goes on to say, "I can show you places that I went. The place where I was told to take her. There was a white Sprinter van with Romanian plates. I parked my car up, the van came behind me, they took Sarah out, and they told me I'd done good." He starts panicking, saying, "I don't know if my family is still safe. I did what I had to do to keep my family safe." And he's playing the victim here. The interviewing officer begins to question this straight off the bat. I think he didn't buy a word of it. And he asks, "Well, how did they contact you?" Which is a pretty obvious question. How did they tell you to abduct her? Like, how did they initially come into contact with you? How did they tell you where to meet them? Like, is it texts, phone calls, emails? But Cousins can't answer this. He replies, "Oh, they just told me to meet them there." And the interviewing officer is like, "Yeah, how? How did they tell you?" He replies, "I've got no mobile number, but they've got mine. They're outside watching, following. I have no phone numbers. They meet me in person." Like, he's just really erratically, like, going from phrase to phrase. And it's a very interesting bullshit narrative, to be honest. I'm in two minds about it, honestly. I either think it's extremely prepared, that he just had it in his back pocket to be like, oh, if anyone questions how I knew her or why I saw her that day, I can say this is the reason and I can be the victim and no one will blame me for what I did. Or he's just completely making this up off the top of his head. Like, you know, in like TV when they're like, all describe the suspect and they always say like, oh, he had an umbrella shaped scar on his face. They go for something so obscure that it's like almost impossible for the police to even begin searching for that. Like, for example, the Romanian plates. A white Sprinter van, very common, especially in London. But then he adds Romanian plates on it, which I guess links up to the story. But at the same time, surely you'd go for something so common, like, I don't know, a red Fiat 500. Hundreds of them. Where do they begin, you know? At the end of this interview in Cousins' home, he was arrested in connection to the disappearance of Sarah Everard. And after this elaborate story of this Romanian gang, police found absolutely no CCTV of him being in the areas that he said he was when he met them. What they did find, however, was that 35 minutes prior to them interviewing him at his home, he completely factory reset his phone. Which begs the question, Was this a coincidence? Did he just randomly decide to reset his phone? Was he panicking? Or was he tipped off by someone internally? Listen, I'm not saying anything in regards to that, but it's certainly suspicious. The investigation continued tirelessly, and on the 10th of March 2021, 7 days after Sarah's disappearance, at 4:20 p.m., her remains were found. 7 days after her disappearance, from being reported missing to finding the remains to finding the killer, like that's pretty impressive investigation work. And I'm saying that because that is the only saving grace of the police in this story. Like everything I even go on to say now about after he's convicted, there's no good. There's no good here. So, hats off to the officers for investigating this so quickly. After Cousins was arrested for the murder of Sarah Everard, he didn't even say he was innocent, he just stayed quiet. But by June 2021, he pleaded guilty. And because of COVID restrictions, this case never went to trial. And it's not uncommon at this time, a lot of things were being settled outside of trial in court. But with all the evidence we have, it's unsurprising that we didn't really need a jury on this one. And in July at the Old Bailey, he pleaded guilty, but stated he was never going to kill her. He was only ever going to rape her. As if that's fine. Like, oh, you only wanted to do that? Oh, okay, yeah, sure, fine. Slap on the wrist, off you go. He says he got confused. Like, that's enough. Like, I'm confused on a daily basis. You don't see me going out murdering people. Confused. Confused about what? Cousins was sentenced to a whole life order, and with luck, will never be a free man again. But the story sadly doesn't end there. And it's safe to say, at this point, there is very minimal trust in the police force. And, there was minimal trust prior to this case, but it very much dwindled very fast. But, the London Metropolitan Police had their chief commissioner read out a statement, Cressida Dick, where she publicly announced that this was one bad apple. Cressida, let me ask you this. What do you do when you find a bad apple in your fruit bowl? Do you take it out and put it in the bin, dispose of it so it doesn't infect the other apples or bananas or oranges that are in that bowl? Or do you leave it there to rot and spread? Like, you had every opportunity to prevent this man being part of the police. Realistically, this man was always going to do something like this. But you had every opportunity to remove him from a position of power, because time after time, for over 6 years, they had multiple reports and evidence of him being a criminal, being a pervert. And they chose to do nothing and chose to cover their backs. Which brings us onto the topic of covering their backs. Just 6 weeks after Sarah's murder, an internal investigation was done on Cousins' colleagues, and specifically a WhatsApp group chat. In part of this WhatsApp group chat, this involved Jonathan Coban, 35 years old, William Neville, 34 years old, and Joel Borders, aged 45 at the time. These text messages, you can view them online if you would like to, but it's going to be no surprise that these messages were extremely racist, homophobic, sexist, and of misogynistic nature. They discussed female colleagues that they'd like to rape, and how people with Down syndrome should be shot. And remember, every single one of these colleagues of Cousins was trained with firearms, so they had the means to carry this out. 2 of these officers, Jonathan Coban and Joel Borders, were actually sentenced to 3 months in prison following the discovery of these messages. So I'm glad something was done. I don't know why one of them wasn't convicted of anything. Maybe he was just there and didn't really say anything, but equally he didn't whistleblow it. I don't know. Like, that right there is also evidence, Cressida, that it's not one bad apple. Each of these men were in a position of trust and power. Whilst, yes, it's not uncommon for people in these industries to have a dark sense of humour. I would know, I witnessed this firsthand. I developed a very dark sense of humour to cope with the stress of the job. But at no point did I make threats to anyone or say the people deserve to die or be, brutally attacked. It's just, they had the means to carry out these threats that were going. It's just not funny. I don't understand. And if this didn't fulfill your trust within the police, what's next probably will make it worse. Cressida Dick also released a public safety announcement with some advice. What should you do if you encounter an officer trying to arrest you and you don't think that they're legit? And we're going to go into each one of these with more detail. But she said you can call 999 and ask them to confirm their identity. You can shout for help. You can run into someone's house. Or you can hail down a bus. Now let's break these down, shall we? Shouting for help. Aren't we taught at a really young age that screaming help doesn't get you any help? Like, if you shout rape, no one's going to come. You're taught to shout fire because people are going to be like, oh my God, fire, let me help, I can put this out. Like, you are heavily relying on this for the general population to help you. The general population doesn't always have the capacity to determine whether a situation is safe or not because they're not trained to. Okay, so we have run into a nearby house. I'm sorry, if you're being arrested and you run, what's going to happen? Thank God we're not in America, because if she gave that advice and you ran and you were in America, you're going to get shot. Flag down a bus. This is the worst one of this for me. So, on the off chance that a bus is passing you in the area that you are supposedly being arrested, are these bus drivers trained to help? Are they trained to stop the bus and get out and call the police and assist? What if this person has a weapon? You are then involving possibly all the passengers as well into this violent, dangerous situation. Like, it's so frustrating. I don't know what went through her head to think, yeah, this is okay. And the last one, phone the police to confirm their identity. This one I can actually put a personal input into. So I worked in the contact centre in 2021 whilst this was happening. And I personally did answer multiple calls, mostly from women, where they'd had interactions with officers that didn't feel quite right. So they phoned to confirm their identity, get the FIN number. And there were multiple examples when we found that FIN number didn't exist, or the officer did exist, but there was no trace of them being in that location at that time. Like, we could pin them somewhere else. And we did actually end up helping a lot of victims in that example. So this particular thing that got put in place actually became really useful for determining really scary crimes. However, with that being said, I can totally understand that in the moment, you're not going to be like, hang on, officer, I just need to call 999. What's your FIN number? Every police force is different, but I can confirm that in Surrey Police, we did take calls like that very seriously to try and comfort that person on the call, to make sure that they're safe, and also try and rebuild that trust in the police again. But if you take this from a public point of view, like if you're hearing this as a member of the general public, fucking bullshit. You are not going to call the police in the middle of being arrested by an officer just to confirm who they are. You're not. And if it's a situation that you're not able to or you're not safe to, it just wasn't thought out. Like, there was no thing from Cresta to say, like, we're going to make sure that all our police are completely vetted, and no, just just phone us. So it really wasn't an appropriate set of advisories. And that's just it. The confidence and trust in the police hit an all-time low in 2020 following the murder of George Floyd in the US. And don't get me wrong, the US and the UK are very different. And why am I touching upon this subject in this case? Because this case was at a vital point in lockdown. Following the murder of George Floyd in America, violence against women and Black people were at an all-time high. Or at least we were starting to be heard on how big an issue this is. In England and Wales, we have the largest prison population in the whole of Western Europe. Despite reforms, training, inquiries into racism, Black Britons make up to 12% of the prisoners, and 20% of children in custody are Black. When you compare that to the 3% of the general population that they make up, it's wow. Like, those are statistics that you can't really ignore. The call to defund the police is an international activist response against the excessive, long-standing violence by police against Black people, especially in the USA. And when people say defund, they mean taking the resources that go to the police and putting them back into the community by building community hubs, grow education resources, and make a safer place for the public. And in the US, it also relates to the militarization of police, which is an undeniably huge problem. I think it's safe to say if you don't live in the US, you're quite grateful for the fact you will never have to come in contact with the American justice system or the American police in general. And personally, I'm stuck in two minds about this theory of defunding the police. And this is my opinion and my opinion only, and I want to share it. When you take away funding from an already struggling organisation, you only have to look at the NHS to realise what this does. The communities that are going to be affected by the funding being taken away from the police are those in a lower income area with a higher crime rate. And statistically, these lower income areas with higher crime rates are populated by minority groups of people. So in my head, it makes more sense to give more funding into the police so that they can have more training, proper vetting systems, safety checks, continuous monitoring of their officers and staff, a proper whistleblowing inspection process, etc. Would this then prevent things like Wayne Couzens falling through the net of many, many holes? However, I do agree that putting funding into these communities would also benefit these people massively. It will give children a safe space to learn, a safe space to hang out outside of school, to keep occupied and stay off the streets where they could be vulnerable to gangs and trafficking. County lines is a massive problem, especially in Surrey and London, because we are the link. The whole of the UK, we are the link. So would this stop children getting sucked into these gangs, or realistically, these people are being herded into lives full of crime because they don't have a choice? But I think it's more than just the word defunding. I think that the picture is so much bigger here. A lot needs to change. There are people out here committing heinous crimes, and they're getting away with it because they're of a certain status, or they have a certain amount of money, or they work within a certain organisation, or they're in, a position of power. All whilst people in lower income areas are threatened into violence, gangs, drug dealing. And it costs the UK taxpayers over £2.5 billion to detain up to 8,000 people a year for cannabis offences. And sometimes this is literally just personal possession. You want my opinion? Make weed legal. Tax it. Put that tax into the NHS. This drug can then also help cure chronic conditions and disorders that also cost millions of pounds of taxpayer money. And yeah, I'm going off at a complete tangent, but do you see my point of this is all linked? Because this is about the bigger picture here. We are in the position we are with police brutality, violence against women and minority groups, with the police in general, because when these laws were put in place, when the funding was decided, these groups of minority people and women were not thought of. So to bring this back round to the devastating case of Sarah Everard, even the media and press just added to the problem here and just refused to acknowledge their part in it and their behaviour towards it, with headlines like, "She was just walking home," inferring that she was just walking home infers that if she wasn't just walking home, like she was doing something, she deserved this because she wasn't just walking home. In these articles, they said she did everything right. She wore comfortable shoes that she could run in. She wore bright colours. She phoned a loved one on their way home. Yes, she did do all of those things. But even if she hadn't have done all of those things, it's not her fault. Again, inferring that women are held responsible for the violence that's bestowed upon them. There were even titles like, "Will women ever trust the police again?" Why not title it, "Will men ever stop abusing women?" Like every article was just putting the blame onto Sarah, putting the blame onto women in general. And that still happens today. Like there are so many articles where they're like, "Oh, this really successful man went to jail." No, this human murdered their spouse. And it still happens today, nearly 3 years after Sarah's murder. And to round this off, during Wayne's conviction, Sarah's mum took the stand in court and said the following statement: "I'm tormented at the thought of what Sarah had to endure. She spent her last hours on earth with the very worst of humanity. She lost her life because Wayne Couzens wanted to satisfy his perverted needs. It is a ridiculous reason. It's nonsensical. How can he value a human life so cheaply? I cannot comprehend it. I am incandescent with rage at the thought of it. He treated my daughter as if she was nothing and disposed of her as if she was rubbish. In the morning when I wake up, I'm hit with the awful reality that Sarah is gone. In the evening at the time she was abducted, I let out a silent scream, saying, 'Don't get in the car, Sarah. Don't believe him. Run.'" I think that is one of the most heartbreaking statements ever to be read out in court, and rightfully so. This case is horrific, and terrifying. Like, I just can't put it into words. And if there is one thing we can take from Sarah's case, it's that this made history and sparked a mass movement within women to say enough is enough. I personally will never forget this case and will never forget the raw emotions that it evoked within me and the women around me. I remember falling out with so many male friends because they just didn't understand. Just didn't understand. So I want to point that out because it is really important. And we're going to call it there, guys. Please make sure you look after yourselves. Go scream into a pillow and make yourself a hot chocolate. Do something nice and calm because that was heavy. Like, we all know the details of that case, but going over it and going over the anger at the time, it still evokes such a raw emotion in me. So let's stop talking about this before I get emotional. I guess on a lighter note, I want to thank you for joining me today. I love that I now have a platform to speak up about these issues. It's fascinating to me, not only from a psychological point of view, but just to be able to speak about it as a woman. There are so many women in this world who cannot speak up. So I will always, always, always do my best to use my platform for good, to speak up for those who cannot. And it doesn't hurt to explore some true crime examples along the way. So if you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to my channel, comment what case you want me to cover next, and stick around because I have some plans. Oh, I was going to say I have some big plans, but I don't want to promise something that I can't necessarily fulfill. But yes, thank you for joining me today and stay safe. I'll see you next time. Bye.